Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We will get started shortly as folks continue to join the call. Great. So we are talking today about offshore wind in Rhode Island. Thank you so much to our guests, Senator Don Euer, Stacy Tingley from Ørsted, and Adam Lupino from the Laborers. We also do have Charles Clarkson from the Audubon Society of Rhode Island joining us as well. So we will get started as soon as we have our full slate of panelists. All right, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. So to go over briefly the running order of our event today, we're going to be talking all about what offshore wind means for Rhode Island, how we're going to bring it to Rhode Island, and how it fits into our Act on Climate goals. My name is Kai. I'm the policy coordinator at Green Energy Consumers. I'll mostly be moderating and we'll leave it up to our excellent guests to talk about all of the details of offshore wind. We will have plenty of time for Q&A. We're really hoping to focus on Q&A today, following our brief presentations from our guest speakers. As always with Zoom, you can make sure to drop questions in the chat as we go along. We also have the Q&A feature on the Zoom webinar. We are going to start recording if we're not already. And if you have any technical difficulties, just drop it into the chat. I think those are the main logistics that we need. So I am the policy coordinator at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, where we work on advocating for everything that goes into a transition to a low carbon future. Offshore wind is one of the most important pieces of that monumental challenge. And so we have spent a lot of time advocating for an increase in offshore wind procurement in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, where we do most of our work. We are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, and we've been around in Rhode Island for 20 years. Our challenge here in Rhode Island is to get to 45% emissions reductions by 2030, and that is thanks in large part to the bill that was passed last year by Senator Euer. Senator Euer was the lead sponsor on that, which was the Act on Climate that set those mandatory economy-wide targets of 45% emissions reductions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. The electric sector accounts for 25% of our emissions here in Rhode Island, but it has an outsized importance because the key to decarbonize our transportation and our buildings will lie in getting those other sources of sectors of our economy onto high efficiency, renewable electric sources. This is just another window onto how important offshore wind will be to getting to our goal of 100% renewable electricity. We're really excited that that just passed the Senate Commerce Committee yesterday. We're getting to Senate Commerce Committee voted yes on a bill to get to 100% renewable electricity by 2033. That's moving to the Senate floor, and we think that it can happen, can pass this year. You can see how on this graph on the right, Revolution Wind, which Stacy is here today to talk about, that's a project from Ørsted that's already contracted with Rhode Island. That is the biggest contract we have right now, the biggest chunk of renewable electricity that will help us to get to 100%. One or two more big offshore wind projects could help us get even closer to that goal. We've got Revolution Wind contracted in Rhode Island. We also have a potential upcoming 600 megawatt RFP that is part of pending legislation that I hope Senator Euer will be able to introduce. Senator Euer introduced this year legislation supported also by Governor McKee that would get us to a 600 megawatt RFP this summer. Our legislative priorities include 100% renewable electricity. As I mentioned, this just passed the Senate Commerce Committee. We also strongly support the 600 megawatt offshore wind procurement introduced by Senator Øyer. Looks like I forgot to put in the bill numbers, but Senator Øyer can, I'm sure, discuss that. We also want to make sure that offshore wind is included in the Act on Climate Plan, and that the administration is following up on the 600 megawatt procurement in a timely manner if passed. We cannot afford to wait on getting another offshore wind contract in Rhode Island because these projects take a very long time to permit and construct. And if we want to get to that 100% by 2033 goal, then we need to start working on offshore wind procurements now. Something else I'll mention is that our utility sale was just finalized this week, and that means that the National Grid, the Narragansett Electric Company, is going to be sold to PPL, a company based in Kentucky and Pennsylvania. We are optimistic that company will do just as good a job as National Grid at rolling out offshore wind and entering contracts, but it really remains to be seen. And for now, I will stop sharing and open up the floor to Senator Øyer to introduce legislative priorities related to offshore wind. Senator Euer is also completing a master's degree related to wind. So truly, we are so lucky to have such an offshore wind expert in our legislature, and please take it away.
Thank you, Kai. Appreciate the invitation and opportunity to speak today. And thank you for all of your advocacy on, and to everyone too on this call on getting Act on Climate done, because it really has been just a sea change in the attitude and attention that folks have in Rhode Island now to actually trying to, meet our goals around climate. So, as Kai mentioned, a big part of that is the electricity sector and being able to transition our electricity sector and making sure that we have enough renewable energy supply to meet the demand. And, Rhode Island has been and continues to be a leader in offshore wind, as we were, the first state to have a domestic offshore wind farm with the Black Island Wind Farm. And I know many of the people who are attendees today in the audience and also participants in this call were very key to making sure that that happened. And so, really building on the leadership that Rhode Island already has in this space, I think is kind of what, and then of course the Act on Climate, as Kai mentioned, is what brought me to introduce the legislation as relating to offshore wind in this legislative cycle. So the bill number on the Senate side is 2583. And then Representative Art Handy is the House sponsor, and that House bill number is 7971. So we had heard the bill in my Environment and Agriculture Committee, and I'm hoping to be able to post it soon for passage. But really the reason that legislation is so important is because it, again, as Rhode Island has been a leader in the offshore wind sector, we see as the leasing has been developing in the Northern Atlantic, Rhode Island has the opportunity to lead in this space by setting a really strong standard as it relates to our state's procurement goals. And I think that's what this piece of legislation does. So there's kind of 2 points in time that Rhode Island has the opportunity to influence these offshore wind projects. There's the federal consistency provisions, which I can wax poetic about that at a different time. But then there's this RFP opportunity where the state actually helps make sure that these procurements are happening. So the bill right now is set up to look at procurement, setting out an RFP, request for proposal process that basically the the utility would do, which is now PPL. I think their company name is going to be Rhode Island Energy. Will be doing to basically look to procure more offshore wind. And so again, the climate crisis really demands that we make this transition, and offshore wind, not only is it a strength for Rhode Island, but in New England, the reason that we're looking at, the offshore wind opportunity here is really, we have the plentiful offshore wind during the winter, when is a time when we need more energy to heat our homes and things like that. So I think, there's additional the benefits of offshore wind and the role that Rhode Island can play in leading in this area. So this RFP legislation, it really is trying to look at making sure that all of this procurement is done responsibly. We want to make sure that we take into consider the workforce, the fisheries, the environment, looking at local supply chains, marine wildlife protection. And so all of those elements are built into this RFP process. And so when the utility would put that out to anyone who's going to bid on this project, that developer would basically have to describe to the utility how they're going to take those myriad of considerations into their plans as they want to develop offshore wind. So, I'm very excited about the opportunity again for Rhode Island to continue to lead in this area, and I think that the framework that we put together in this legislation, quite frankly, is something that some of the developers were already doing, but it really sets the standard, I think, and sets the stage for us to continue to have sustainably developed offshore wind in a way that I hope sets the tone for the region as the industry continues to grow and continues to expand. I did just want to touch really quickly on, because you mentioned the utility transfer. My understanding is that the sale actually closed this morning. So I think that the transfer actually took place a few hours ago. And so I think officially National Grid shareholders are no longer involved. And I think PPL is now officially our utility provider in the state. And I think they're going to be doing business under Rhode Island Energy. I think what I've said all along as far as the utility transfer is that we need a utility who's going to work in partnership with the state to make sure that we're able to meet our climate goals. And we need regulators and elected leaders who are going to put the laws in place to make sure that we're able to hold them accountable and regulate this sector properly. So there's a number of items and issues that I'm very excited we're actually included, and I give a lot of credit to Attorney General Nerona and his team for getting additional commitments from PPL, specifically as it relates to the Act on Climate Goals and the implementation, the infrastructure, both planning, assessment, and upgrades that are going to be needed to make sure that we're able to bring offshore wind online as soon as possible. So I think we have a new utility. They've committed to working in partnership, and I think it's up to us to move forward in good faith and also hold them accountable when needs be. So again, I look forward to the conversation on the panel this afternoon, and I thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Senator Euer. That was a great comprehensive overview of why we need this policy, what it will do, and then also some of these other factors that are going on in Rhode Island, including that news about PPL. So I will now go back to sharing my screen and open it up for Stacy from Ørsted to talk about the project that is currently contracted in Rhode Island, Revolution Wind.
Thanks, Kai. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to the group today. And thanks to Senator Euer for your continued leadership in driving, a lot of initiatives, but specifically the offshore wind legislation, bringing another procurement to Rhode Island. We're really excited about it. So next slide, I will just do, Kai, I will say, ask me to keep it under 10 minutes. She might have even said 7. So I'm going to do my best to kind of breeze through these slides. If anybody has any questions after, just drop them into the chat, or we can connect later. Happy to talk to you guys about this, do a deeper dive. So we're going to talk a little bit about the project our company is, and then a little bit about the activity that we've got going in Rhode Island. So a little bit about our companies. Ørsted and Eversource have a 50-50 joint venture partnership to develop offshore wind in the Northeast. Ørsted is a leader in offshore wind. We've got over 1,500 turbines installed worldwide, and Eversource is a regional expert in energy transmission. So together, we're bringing our experience in developing offshore wind for the region. Oh, that's okay, Kai. The formatting's a little wonky, so you're probably gonna, I can talk through it. So we've got 3 projects under development right now in the Northeast. We've got South Fork Wind, which serves Long Island, Sunrise Wind for New York, and then Revolution Wind, which we're here to talk to you about today. So the next slide. So Revolution Wind is located in federal waters. It's in lease area 0486. It's over 15 miles south of the Rhode Island coast. It's immediately adjacent to the South Fork Wind project, which is in the light blue box in that lease area on the picture. Project permitting is underway. We've been conducting stakeholder outreach. Once we receive our permit approvals, we'll start construction. We'll start with the cable installation and construction work onshore. And based on BOEM's current schedule, this could begin as early as 2023. So the next slide. So the project is permitted using a project design envelope approach. It basically allows us to define a range of parameters within our COP, our construction and operations plan, that we submit to BOEM. So it allows us to facilitate some more meaningful impact assessments while still allowing for some flexibility to adapt the design as the permitting process progresses. So the project will include up to 100 turbines built on monopile foundations, up to 2 offshore substations, and a network of inter-array cables located between the turbines. I want to note that we're not intending to build all 100 turbine positions as part of Revolution Wind. That number is going to be closer to 65, but we're carrying these positions in our permits just to give us that flexibility for project siting and turbine siting as we go through the process. I also want to note that in, I believe it was 2019, Ørsted and Eversource led a joint effort among the other New England leaseholders to develop and adopt a uniform one nautical mile spacing. It's essentially a grid spacing of the turbines across all of our lease areas. So it's a uniform layout. All of the developers in this area have adopted it. It results in over 230 distinct transit lanes, and that really helps to ensure a safe navigation and enhance rescue capabilities. And it also represents the largest spacing of any other offshore wind project in the world. So the project also includes export cables. You can kind of see it in the area. So the green area is Revolution Wind, and there's a green dotted line that goes from the northern part of the lease area up through the west passage of Narragansett Bay to a landfall location in the Quonset Business Park. We'll be doing a horizontal directional drill method at landfall, or HDD, that will help to minimize any potential impacts to the area, and it will also help us reach sufficient cable burial depth and also ensure that the cable remains buried. The onshore cable route is, all things considered, very short. It's about 1 mile. The cables will be buried along the route to an onshore substation next to an existing national grid substation, or I guess a now Rhode Island Energy substation that's located in Davisville. Next slide. So permitting is well underway. BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, is a lead permitting agency for the project. The project, though, is as Senator Euer mentioned earlier, it's also subject to the review, approval, or consultation of several other agencies, including the Rhode Island CRMC, the Rhode Island Energy Facility Siting Board, and the Department of Environmental Management. So we expect, based on BOEM's current schedule, to receive our approvals mid to late 2023. Next slide. So we conducted an extensive geophysical and geotechnical survey effort within our lease area and along the export cable route. It mapped the seafloor in detail to learn about potential environmental impacts to support project siting and engineering. So that, and we'll actually have another campaign in Narragansett Bay to do some this spring and summer to do some more assessments and micrositing. So next slide. So we did a number of other environmental and cultural surveys. A lot of them are listed here. They're all performed in accordance with published agency guidelines, and we use industry experts that also have an in-depth understanding of our local environments. We've really left no stone unturned, and we think the results of our extensive surveys will facilitate a very robust assessment by the regulatory agencies. You can see this picture on the right. That's about where we're going to make landfall. So you can see super industrial. As far as cable locations are concerned, it really is an ideal spot. So next slide. Here are some other technical assessments that we did for the project. And you can view all of this, by the way, in our COP, in our construction and operations plan. And that's available at BOEM's website. They have a Revolution Wind dashboard, and you can access all of our permit filings. I love using this picture because it does a great job of highlighting the beneficial effects that are associated with our projects. And so this here, you can see the artificial reef effect. It's very well documented in the installation of the turbine foundations. We're also seeing this experience. We're having the same experience at Block Island. So where the foundations and the scour protection at the base of the foundations results in this the creation of a hard bottom habitat, and it attracts and supports a variety of marine life. Next slide. So obviously we take our commitment to promoting the smart growth of the industry super seriously. And we're always looking for sort of new ways to engage with our stakeholders. And this here is, you can see, and I think there are some folks on the call here today who have also visited this, but this is a full-scale navigation simulator that we developed at the US MRC. It's the US Marine Resources Center. It's in Middletown, Rhode Island. So it's a full-out simulation of Revolution Wind, and you kind of go into this area and they've got monitors set all around, and you get a sense of what it's like to sail through the wind farm. And it's been a really impactful tool with dealing with, like, you know, when we bring our stakeholders out there, and we've gotten such amazing feedback. And I have to say, it's majority of it was overwhelmingly positive. We had one participant actually say that it was an important tool to disarm fear. Greg. Yep. So Greg Mancini, he went. It's just really awesome. So, you know, if anybody's interested, I can see if we can arrange for a tour. See, next slide. Getting towards the end, I'm trying to remember what else we've got in here. So Senator Euer talked a little bit about some of the benefits that offshore wind can bring to Rhode Island. So I want to talk a little bit more about what Revolution Wind means for the state and some of the activities happening here. All told, we expect to invest about $250 million in Rhode Island to support the development and construction of Revolution Wind. We've committed $4.5 million in funding to support education, research, workforce development and training, and supply chain development. Our Providence headquarters is home to close to 50 employees now, and it's turning into a hub for engineering and project management. And, you know, as someone who, like, and you can probably get a sense of how old my headshot is, but I've been, you know, doing this in Rhode Island since, I think, 2012, when that same office was just like 6 or 7 people. And it's pretty remarkable to see just, you know, just how our presence has grown as things kind of progress here. It's really exciting to see. We also have our innovation hub, which is based in the Providence CIC. Our innovation team is leveraging the U.S. Innovation ecosystem to support our global offshore wind portfolio. We completed, with the help of our partners in the Rhode Island building and construction trades, we completed construction of the advanced foundation component manufacturing facility, which is pictured here at Provport. Demio Construction built the site using several Rhode Island-based companies. The fabrication started this, and then so that was completed fairly recently, within the last couple of months. So fabrication on the advanced foundation components will start this summer, where we'll have 100+ workers on the site daily. They'll all the work is being done under a PLA with the Rhode Island Building and Construction Trades, who really just, you know, I have to give credit because they've just been amazing partners for us in Rhode Island in building this industry. So some other stuff we've got in Rhode Island, we're building 5 crew transfer vessels. They're highly specialized vessels for the offshore wind industry. They're being fabricated right now in Rhode Island by Blount Boats and Warren and Senesco and Quonset. And all of this activity is happening right here in Rhode Island, thanks to the state's vision for a clean energy future, and thanks to the leadership of Mike Sabatoni, Senator Euer, Governor McKee, you know, now Commerce Secretary Raimondo. It's all just really, really exciting stuff happening, and it's great to know that Rhode Island is leading. I see one question. So Rhode Island is, so please repeat the dollar figure for the total investment in Rhode Island. We expect to spend about $250 million in Rhode Island to support the development and construction of Revolution Wind.
Great, thanks so much, Stacy. And hopefully we'll have a few more questions for you at the end. But for now, I'll pass it over to Adam from the laborers, Adam Lupino, who has been a tremendous advocate for offshore wind, and we have been so pleased to partner with as part of Climate Jobs Rhode Island. Climate Jobs Rhode Island was founded, I guess, well over a year ago now, maybe almost 2 years ago, and has been a unique opportunity for climate advocates to work with labor advocates, understanding our different constituencies and where we're coming from, and being able to work together to advocate for this cleaner, more just, more equitable future that is full of good jobs for Rhode Island families and workers. So Adam, I will spotlight you, and please take it away.
Thank you, Kai, and thanks for all your support and the work that we do in Climate Jobs. And the leadership of Senator Euer has been amazing on this issue and so many others as we try to make this just transition. And, you know, I really appreciate the comments that Stacy made. Ørsted has been a true partner to the laborers and to the Rhode Island building trades throughout, you know, from the beginning, and we value that relationship. I'm Adam Lupino. I'm the regional policy coordinator for the laborers union in the New England region. We cover all the 6 New England states and parts of New York, specifically in Providence and in Rhode Island. We have over 10,000 members that are involved in all aspects of working life, public service, construction, casino gaming. We have in healthcare. We have a wide variety of membership. And obviously we've been involved in energy, fossil fuel industry for decades, nuclear power industry for decades. We're in all of the above energy union. We're, you know, involved in a lot of signature projects throughout Rhode Island. You know, the infrastructure that you see built every day, you know, the signature buildings all the way out to the Block Island Wind Farm, which we were proud to participate in a number of years ago. We're very supportive of offshore wind and the opportunity for jobs, not only in the construction, but also in the ports and truly a U.S.-based industry with a robust supply chain. Right now, we're supportive of the RFP bill for the 600 megawatts. We think that's exciting. We hope it could be more, but we think it's a great start. Senator Øyer has been leading that effort, and inclusive of all that in legislation. In fact, I want to thank the Senate for passing last night renewable labor standards on renewable energy projects over 2 megawatts. We've been pretty consistent about applying apprenticeship training, wage standards, and project labor agreement language as a requirement on these projects. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a long history in the energy industry, and for many years, these have been good family supporting union jobs. And unfortunately, as we've transitioned to renewable energy, which we want to be involved in, sometimes those jobs have not kept up those same standards. However, the one major exception has been the commitment from the offshore wind industry to recognize that these need to be family supporting union jobs. We were able to demonstrate a proof of concept on the Block Island wind farm. Developers like Ørsted have chosen that the union construction model is the right way, the right project delivery method for their projects. A highly skilled, trained local workforce that's committed to getting those jobs done on time and under budget. And the leadership of Mike Sabatoni and the Rhode Island Building Trades, who I do a lot of work with, laid the foundation for a national PLA with Ørsted to encompass all their projects, and that work began right here in Rhode Island, and we're really excited about that. We're excited about Revolution Wind. We see this opportunity. We've done the work and the foundation component building in Proudport. We're really excited for that to get going. We see the opportunity in other aspects, up and down the coast. As there's so much robust competition, especially with Massachusetts and other ports, we really see an opportunity to invest in a workforce that's here, that's ready to be trained and deployed to make sure that these projects are successful. We see the opportunity, obviously, in if there's a potential for manufacturing here, and then obviously the maintenance work would be a huge opportunity for us. In terms of work hours, just like we would maintain a power plant, and things like that. So we are really excited. We want to work on training partnerships. We've had discussions, with Ørsted's commitment to investing funds in Rhode Island, with trying to come up with a training partnership with GWO and utilizing CCRI and our existing training programs, which for a long time throughout all aspects of construction have been industry leading. We're excited to work with our members and our signatory contractors who they work for, and really creating this entire model that hopefully will continue to branch out into all aspects of the renewable industry, inclusive of solar and onshore wind and everything like that. So just really happy to be here, really happy of the partnership we've built with Climate Jobs Rhode Island. Pat and Priscilla have done an incredible job with that, and we're just happy to be participating in that and really have these robust policy conversations, and then it leads to legislative wins. So we're just excited to create work opportunities for our Rhode Island members, and also create pathways for new members, and doing a lot of the work that we do in pre-apprenticeship and creating those pathways to construction careers. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Lots there for us to ask questions about later. And finally, we have Charles Clarkson from the Audubon Society of Rhode Island to address environmental impacts across the board. Charles is a specialist in birds and avians at Audubon, but will be able to address, of course, the numerous different environmental issues associated with offshore wind. Thanks so much for joining us, Charles.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And thank you all for the opportunity to chat on this panel today. It's a great honor. I am the Director of Avian Research for Audubon Society, and in this role, my principal source of concern is doing everything that we can to mitigate the effects of climate change on our statewide and regional bird populations. So my job is fairly multifaceted, and I work with regional applications of pesticides and how they impact our bird populations. And then with regards to things like offshore wind, is understanding not just the implications of offshore wind in terms of its ability to reduce our climate emissions, but also in the construction and building and operation of offshore wind farms, what we can do to mitigate the impacts of those wind farms on avian populations primarily. So I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with the 2019 National Audubon report. It was titled Species on the Brink. It was highly robust, analyzing over 140 million data sets that basically distinguished that we have across 98% of the lower 48 states, we have these climate threats that are threatening approximately half, or 398 total species in North America with extinction by 2050, if we're unable to curb our emissions and go from a projected 3 degrees Celsius rise down to something lower, to the degree of something like 1.5 degrees Celsius. Why that's so important for us here in the Northeast is because most of these climate threats, which includes things like unusual spring heat events, fire threats, are the most concentrated in the Northeast. So stretching from roughly Maine to West Virginia, this is the area of the country that can expect the largest forms of insult to our avian communities through time due to these issues associated with climate change. And for a coastal state like Rhode Island, where we have large numbers of breeding shorebirds that are kind of pinched on these shorelines, the projected outlook for some endangered species is quite catastrophic, actually. So they're predicting catastrophic habitat loss for species like the salt marsh sparrow, the piping plover, American oyster catcher. And so part of what we're doing as ornithologists and as conservation biologists is understanding what it is that we can do to best mitigate these impacts, both in real time and looking ahead. So concentrating on looking at policy agendas that can limit the overall warming across not just North America, but the globe, and then focusing on the creation of these adaptive management plans that we can use to avoid and minimize the impacts of offshore winds, understanding that, one, we are very much in favor of offshore wind, because if you're looking at it relative to the fossil fuel industry, it is a huge increase in the overall sustainability and green nature of energy production in terms of its implications for wildlife populations, but also understanding that offshore wind is not immediately going to reverse these harmful effects of climate change. Simply put, the carbon that is currently in our atmosphere is going to be there and is going to be impacting our climate for decades to come, even if we were to turn off the source tomorrow. So the delayed response of climate is something we have to keep in mind as we move forward with projects that are renewable in nature, like solar siting, like offshore wind. And so for birds to survive and increase their overall likelihood of survival through time, we have to do what we can to limit those population level impacts. So my job is primarily looking at what the impacts of placement of offshore winds might be for local bird communities of birds that utilize our offshore environments for non-breeding season foraging, or transit through the area during periods of migration. And so I'm primarily focusing on both the potential collision aspects of offshore wind, as well as displacement of birds from high quality foraging areas, and what we can do to mitigate those losses to either the foraging area itself or individuals to a population. So here in the Northeast, that primarily translates to looking at ways in which offshore wind might disturb hard bottom environments, these benthic communities that birds tend to forage heavily on, and focusing primarily on our are three major endangered species that we care about along the southern coast of Rhode Island, which is the red knot, the piping plover, and the roseate tern. So, you know, the eastern forest as a whole, so all of eastern North America, the eastern forests are threatened with a loss of approximately 59% of all avian species over the next 30 years should nothing be done to change our climate. And so that's why we are completely on board with the idea of offshore wind and its ability to not only mitigate the losses that we're currently seeing, but in some instances reverse those losses, hopefully, should we have enough offshore wind coming on board to reduce that overall projected warming from that 3 degrees Celsius warming scenario down to something more manageable, like 1.5 degrees Celsius. So I understand that there are, I'm sure, a multitude of questions revolving around many wildlife populations, not just birds, and I'm happy to answer those questions, as well as the overall environmental impacts of offshore wind. And so I'll kind of stop there and allow for Q&A so that everyone can have a chance to field some questions.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our panelists. So the Q&A is now open. Please drop some in, but I do have a couple to get us started. The first I will direct at everyone, which is the current proposed legislation for offshore wind procurement had 600 megawatts, up to 600 megawatts as the target number of megawatts in the next procurement. How much offshore wind should Rhode Island be considering procuring in the next procurement or by 2030? Are there any downsides to procuring either too much, like what if we go above our electric demand here in Rhode Island, or too little? What would be too little offshore wind? And I think all of you might have different ways of answering that question. So whoever wants to jump in first.
I'm happy to start. I mean, I do think that there is a risk in procuring supply that we don't need, because that results in infrastructure that we're paying for, and that if we don't need that supply, we don't want to be paying for the infrastructure and causing increased utility bills for folks for energy that we wouldn't be able to use. That being said, you mentioned the renewable energy standards bill. I know we were hopeful for setting a goal of 2030 and an extension to 2033. I think we need to be as aggressive as possible in getting any procurements moving forward, because again, as Stacy mentioned, there's these different levels of permitting that needs to happen. It takes time to, get the permitting, get the construction done. So I think, we need to be as aggressive as possible. And again, we're on a regional grid as well. And so that needs to be taken into consideration. As far as, 600 megawatts, is that the right answer? How much do we need moving forward? I think that, there's that intersection of like, what are we doing with wind? What are we doing with solar? And how does that all intersect together? And so I think seeing some of the technical aspects of how this all plays out, I think is still going to be determined about what the next procurement needs to look like.
Thanks so much. Any other answers to that question?
Sorry, my mute button was hiding. I think that the state with the 600 megawatts, I've heard that I've heard it been referred to as sort of the sweet spot for what the state can procure right now for offshore wind. From an industry perspective, it's probably obvious, right? We'd like to see that number up a little bit. With a larger procurement of like in the 800 to maybe 1,000 or more, you can really achieve that economies of scale. And then it gives us some more flexibility to kind of to build out those benefits that come along with a larger procurement, right? That being said, but I think that if the result is 600, it is what it is, right? And I think at any size, the future for Rhode Island, because like Senator Øyer said, it's a regional energy grid. You know, I think there's potential down the road as well. So, you know, we are all in on offshore wind, clearly. We're happy the state is too.
Adam, I saw you come off mute as well. Do you have anything to add?
No, I just think I would agree. I think it's trying to figure out the right balance. Obviously, you know, the regional energy grid and each other state kind of, you know, operating on their own and trying to figure out where that all connects. I think transmission planning is going to be, you know, something critical going forward and when we site and, you know, I think that has to be taken into account when these RFPs are released and the size and scope. But, you know, we're excited. We're excited for the opportunity for offshore wind, as we stated before. It's just making sure we find that balanced, measured approach, while at the same time allowing the industry to grow where it needs to go.
Great. I'll ask the next question now, which is, what is the most impactful thing that a member of the public who wants to see more offshore wind can do to support it?
Go ahead, Stacy.
Contact your legislators.
Yeah, I agree. I think you know, definitely expressing support in the variety of ways that we as legislators hear from folks. You know, calls to our office, emails always work. You know, writing letters to the editor in support. You know, one thing that struck me as Charles was talking is that we end up getting kind of deluged with that flood of like disinformation. And I think that there's real considerations that we need to have when we're doing things like developing offshore wind. And again, this is the purpose of the RFP. But I think, you know, like Charles was talking about the impact of the birds. And I just thought, you know, I get emails from folks who are like, but the birds and turbine strikes and things like that. And my response is, well, let me tell you about how the birds are doing under climate change. But I will tell you that kind of flood of disinformation that we get, because there's a way to do this responsibly. You know, Stacy and Ørsted, they've been leaders in this of developing it responsibly, you know, and Charles with the science, bringing that science so that we can develop it responsibly. But we can do this, we can do it right. And so if folks want to help, reaching out and giving that positive support, telling us that you support this, goes a long way. Because what often ends up happening is that we get a lot of the negative feedback as legislators about things that people don't like, and then folks forget to reach out to us about things that they do like. So I would definitely encourage you all to reach out to your senators and reps and let them know that you support this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, it's completely tangential to the question, but I'm happy to address that issue regarding disinformation and concern of the impacts of you know, wind farms or renewable resources in general on avian populations. And I'll just keep it brief. You know, we are still very much in a data gathering phase. The issue that we have is that the technologies have and the pace with which things are being installed and these new technologies are getting up and running is so fast that, as is generally the case, science and the scientific understanding of the impacts of these technologies on avian populations, or any wildlife population for that matter, is still kind of racing to catch up. But what I can say is that there are incredibly passionate folks out there who are working diligently to put together these really comprehensive adaptive management plans that are incredibly helpful for avoiding and minimizing impacts during both the construction and operation phases of offshore wind installments. And so that includes not only just regional monitoring plans for at-risk species or species that might transit the area, but also more general monitoring plans that are priorities that are common to all geographic areas that are being developed. So our understanding is growing and it's becoming more comprehensive. And to the Senator's point, yes, there are birds that will unfortunately suffer mortalities or maybe population level impacts from offshore wind. But our goal, our job as scientists and conservationists is to understand what those impacts are and develop ways in which we can mitigate them. And thus far, we've been very successful in doing so. And when you compare those levels of mortality coming from these renewable resources to the mortality that's being caused from the rampant effects of climate change, which is being driven primarily by this fossil fuel issue, and only 25% of our fossil fuel comes from electricity, but it's enough to have a incredibly steep measurable impact on our overall global climate. And so just removing that piece of that contribution to the overall global climate change and turning it into something that is renewable is down the road going to have a much more beneficial effect for these wildlife populations. And so that's what people have to keep in mind. It's very easy to push back against these new technologies that aren't really well understood, but there's no shortage of scientific communities out there who are all for offshore wind as a renewable resource, provided we have sufficient management plans that are adaptive and capable of minimizing whatever impacts are being imposed upon these wildlife populations.
Thanks, Charles. And I will agree with Senator Øyer and Charles that anecdotally, the pushback that I hear from folks is it's not on offshore wind, often is, oh, I heard they kill birds, or most recently that they cause lobster deformities, which are pretty easy to, it's hard to say directly you're wrong, but it's also, there is a lot of misinformation around that. One useful talking point on the birds front that I find is that a single high-rise building will kill far more birds than an offshore wind turbine will. And we're not stopping building high-rise buildings for the birds, which maybe, would be something to consider, but.
No, please, let's not consider that.
No, we won't consider that. Great. Any other questions in the chat? If not, I will keep on asking some of our panelists. All right, so for the average Rhode Islander, what do you think the biggest impacts that they will notice in a world where we're powered primarily on offshore wind?
Hopefully a lack of price fluctuations. I think that's one of the things that right now we're actually looking at a spike in prices in the fall, and it has to do with of electricity prices in the fall. And that has to do with the fact that because of the fossil fuel system that we are beholden to, we do energy procurements and have to make power purchases, and that gets impacted by the global commodities market. So when Russia starts a war and people on the commodities market are speculating over prices of barrels of oil, that has an impact into what we are paying on our electricity bill. And, so that kind of stabilization of prices and being able to be more predictive about what the pricing is going to be and not having to rely on that global market to me it seems like a much better future from a cost perspective, in addition to all of the climate benefits. And more jobs for Adams folks that are local.
I agree with the senator. I think, you know, hopefully there's an opportunity where there's there's cost control. You're not going to see some types of rate shock and things like that. And as we kind of get to this point, obviously we, having been involved in the fossil fuel industry for a number of years, we never did solve that bottleneck issue that we have in New England. And there's a myriad of reasons of why to do that and why not to. But we're here today, and we need to move forward. We need to have a path forward. And I think this aspect, this opportunity for offshore wind is one thing. To go back earlier, I think, for us, our members are consumers and ratepayers as well. And just like we do on a number of issues, educating our own members on the importance of this, not just for the kitchen table issues of job opportunities, but just as a consumer, as a ratepayer, and what this means to them, and what it means for a cleaner economy. I think we have to take that charge, and we've started to do that as well to educate them.
I wish I could come up with something original and unique, but really all I can do now is just echo Senator Øyer's and Adam's sentiments. For me, it's a source of personal pride. I was part of the team that brought Block Island Wind Farm to Rhode Island, and I just continue to be just really happy with how the industry has grown, with how sort of what offshore wind means for Rhode Island has grown into what it is now, and what the potential is for the future. It's about creating good, high-paying jobs. It's about building out our port infrastructure to support these projects. And by the way, not just the projects in Rhode Island, but the projects in the region, right? Like, it started here in Rhode Island, and for me, and I'm getting goosebumps, it's so corny, but there's just so much more for Rhode Island. It's so meaningful in so many different ways. I'll just stop there. But it's exciting.
Awesome. Thank you all. And with that, it's almost 2 p.m. And I did see one additional question in the chat, so I will follow up with you, Mary, about that. And sorry, I didn't see those earlier. I'll follow up with you right after this call. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. And we hope to take this information and use it to bring more offshore wind to Rhode Island that is sustainably sited and maximizes the benefits that we can bring to our state. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.